About a television series called A Leap of Faith. And at the time we spoke to Lisa Chiat, who was looking at the time for women who had made a leap of faith. Well, together finally with Lauren Groenewald, she has put together the series, and it's starting on SABC3 on April the 1st. It was commissioned by the Religious Department of SABC3, which is interesting. So we got Lauren to tell us all about it. Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Thanks, Nancy.
Nice to have you with us. And the leap of faith. So now the women's stories, or the women whose stories you have put together in this series, were they women who had a religious story of some sort, had made a leap of faith in the traditional sense?
I think what's really interesting about this series is that we are profiling women across the board, and not necessarily women who are religious, but women who have undergone a major leap of faith in their lives, and there's been a major turning point. So what makes this series different to any other series in terms of profiling amazing women is really their journey, and it's all in the telling. So I just watched before I came here an episode about Diana Motsitsi, a fantastic woman from Joburg. She's a nurse. She's a mother of 5. She's somebody that you immediately will relate to. But Diana's leap of faith was really saying goodbye to her daughter and hello to her son when her daughter decided to transition from being a woman into a man. And being a Christian, Diana happens to be a Christian, it was an amazingly difficult leap for her, a very difficult journey. And what has been absolutely astounding for me is that people are prepared to share and be quite generous about something which is incredibly intimate, and journeys that have taken maybe a year, 2, 3 years for them to process, and at a point of healing they are prepared to share.
Yes, it's one thing to share your story in writing or even on the radio, but to share your story for a television series is quite a difficult thing. At what point did you come in on her story? Did you talk to her? Did you talk to her daughter stroke son? How did you sensitively get these stories on film?
Well, Lisa Chiat, who is the presenter and the host, and what we call her really is a story collector, because Lisa's background is in journalism, is in radio first. And she had met a lot of these women in her work before. And then through women's networks, through conversations with people, we also obviously had a very broad idea of themes that we wanted to approach in the series. And through conversations with different networks, somebody would say, you really need to talk to Diana, she's this amazing woman. And you know, it's taken some time and some convincing, because once you go onto national TV, your story is really out there. And in a way, it's taking you back on that journey, things that you thought you've processed. What was interesting about Diana and Temba's story is that during the interview, Temba, who used to be in Mbali, said this was the first time he cried since he's transitioned from being a woman into a man, because he was just taken back to the place at which him and his mother had this immense conflict before she accepted his transition. So it has been, I mean, on every shoot we've all cried, and it's been quite a journey.
How have you found all these women? I remember when we spoke to Lisa the other day, the hunt was still on. I mean, somebody like Diana, that would have been one story, but generally speaking, did the women themselves come forward? Did people who knew of women who may qualify come forward?
I think what's important for us in terms of the women we profile is a lot of those women, we'd be able to tell their story even if they hadn't made the leap. So they are amazing women who have achieved things. Like, for instance, Tracy Derrick is one of our characters. She's a world-renowned photographer, documentary photographer, and she got breast cancer, and then later, during the processing her journey through cancer, really, she turned the camera on herself and took a completely different journey from what she'd done before. She's somebody who really doesn't like to be in front of the camera. And then her leap of faith was really to go the chemotherapy route. She was somebody who was quite a holistic, natural person, but having 2 young daughters, she had to take that leap. So her story we encountered through her work, really, and seeing her exhibition called 1 in 9, which was a project that dealt with her journey and with her leap. We did have letters from daughters saying, you need to talk to my mother. A wonderful character, Marilyn Saul's daughter, wrote to us and said, my mother used to be a top cop, a captain, and she left it all to go and do community work, and she's doing amazing community work in Mitchell's Plain and helping abused domestic workers. So we got stories from communities, and then also just from colleagues, people who would say, you know, I worked with this woman, she's amazing, she's done this or she's done that. And the hunt continues. We've shot 10 or 11, and we've still got another 13 to do.
So the hunt is still on, so if anybody would like to get in touch, they can do. What does it involve then? I mean, do you first of all have to decide, I imagine that this must be a little bit difficult. First of all, you have to decide if this story is going to work for you. It doesn't to denigrate that woman's particular story in any way, but you do have to assess whether or not it's going to cut it. Television is a very demanding medium.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for us as producers, we've got a lot of things we need to think about. We need to consider the demographic of women that we're talking to, and the women that we're talking about. So we would like to have a broad range of women, and then also a broad range of subjects. A lot of women have gone through illness and have gone through cancer, have gone through sickness. So that is a common theme, and that often requires a huge leap of faith for people to trust. What's been interesting for us is also to unlock where people have found their strength, and I suppose that's what the leap of faith really is. What people have done, and also there are major leaps and there are minor leaps, and they're all relevant. We did a story with Hanneli Prinsloo, who's a freediving champion, and she was this face of success. And her leap was really to acknowledge to the world outside that although she had this very successful public persona, personally her life was falling apart. And very brave for her to come out and say that publicly. Mm-hmm. So, we've had to, in terms of selecting the characters, we go out and we meet them. The directors, Lisa has met all the women herself first, and then as a team we'll sit together and we'll talk about the stories we think are interesting. And then we go through a second phase where we actually go out and meet the women again. And we talk to them. There's some stories that are going to put a very personal thing in the spotlight, and we need to be responsible about that and say, are you sure you want to go onto national TV with this story? Because it's going to open a whole lot of wounds again. So there are various things we consider when selecting the characters.
You mentioned health being a primary issue, because it's something that a lot of women would relate to, somebody else's ill health, because it may happen to me, it has happened to somebody I know, etc., and we're all very vulnerable, particularly as women. But were there any other themes that kept emerging? You think, goodness me, so many women have been through this issue. Any other things that cropped up in the number of the people that came forward?
Well, I think that we found that a lot of women who are mothers and daughters are activists. There are a lot of women who are fighting women's issues every day. We met a fantastic woman called Funeka Soldat. She's got an organization called Free Gender in Khayelitsha. She is a gay activist, and she was correctively raped. And instead of being quiet in her community, she started this organization called Free Gender.
We've had her on the program a number of times. She has a lot to say.
So I think that what was quite interesting that to find out for us is that, just people that you would consider to be somebody's mother or somebody's daughter are very actively engaging in women's issues, because we have to, because that's the kind of society we live in.
The other kind of society we live in is one in which is very much in transition, and yet still women are having to confront all sorts of things, and despite all, they have gone through all sorts of things. I'm not sure if you were able to hear, but right at the beginning I was reading a story about a woman who has just actually graduated, Vinoria Nyambezi. She's just graduated from UWC, but her story began, the worst of it began at the age of 13 when she was forced into a marriage. She had 3 children, but amazingly 12 years later she decided to go to school. Her grades weren't good enough, so she went back to school again. Just incredible story of tenacity against this despite all. You would imagine, having been forced into a marriage at 13, that would be your life over. Many of those sort of stories?
Yeah, most certainly. I think another fantastic character, and I'd like to talk about these women because this is really what the series is about, is a woman called Judy Kotze, She came from a very small town, very conservative, and her biggest dream was to be a minister in a time when it wasn't allowed. And that was the first challenge she had to overcome, which she did. And then she had to come to terms with her sexuality and work as a minister, gay minister within the church. So I think that a lot of the women that we've profiled are women that have had to constantly challenge and reaffirm their position in society and fight for a place. And they've all done so and found an incredible strength in different places. Tracy Derrick, the photographer, her sort of spiritual ground is her work, and she photographs a lot of sacred spaces and peoples and rituals, and that's where she finds her release. Somebody like Funeka Soldat has a strong relationship with her ancestors, and it was just really interesting to go on those journeys, and for Lisa Chart, our host or our storyteller, to go on that journey with those women.
And the strength that they have derived from seeing their stories, at the end of it, I'm presuming that you would have shown them sort of tracks and bits that you've shot. But when they've seen the end product, has it been empowering for them? What has their responses been?
Only one or two of the women have actually seen the program, which is amazing. Another leap of faith to hand your story over to somebody to tell it. But we have got very good relationships with all of them, and we have been in communication with them. But I think that by the time somebody says, look, you can tell my story, I think they've come to a point where it is important to share. And it's been incredible just how generous people have been in terms of sharing those very, very intimate stories.
I suppose the biggest leap of faith for you would be to do a sequel on a series of of men who've made a leap of faith. Do you think that may be more difficult? I say that rather presumptuously, but may it be more difficult for men perhaps to tell their stories? Have you in some ways found that women once tapped into have been willing to share their stories?
I'm sure that we would find the same profile of stories if we had to tell men's stories. I think, people go through incredible journeys. One of our directors, Llewellyn Roderick, has been on his own journey with brain cancer and a very spiritual journey of healing. And so we're not just women telling women's stories. We are looking at it quite broadly. And I think that, I think it goes across the board. But this particular program was commissioned by the SABC for a women's slot. It was commissioned by SABC3, by the religious department. And they've been very open-minded in terms of how we approach the subject, which has been incredibly refreshing and a wonderful way to work.
And I'm sure it'll be very inspiring to watch. And I think if anybody is inspired and they would like to tell you a little bit more about a woman that they know who's made a leap of faith, they can contact you how?
Well, our website is up and running since yesterday, so we're very excited about that. It's called IamWomanSeries.com, and people can get hold of us through that. They can also get hold of us on our Facebook page, which is I Am Woman Leap of Faith.
Okay. IamWomanSeries.com, IamWomanSeries.com, or on the Facebook page it's I Am Woman Leap of Faith. If you'd like to share, do. Thanks so much to the team, Lon Wabofani, Hazel Makuzeni, I'm Nancy Richards. Up next afternoon, talk with Ashraf Garda, but right now, 2 o'clock, time for the news with Utsile Saku.